Chapter 1. A Birth in Ancient Syracuse. In the year 287 BCE, in the Greek city-state of Syracuse on the island of Sicily, a child named Archimedes was born. Syracuse at that time was a bustling port city, a center of commerce and culture in the Mediterranean. It was a place where Greek traditions mingled with local Sicilian life, creating a vibrant environment of learning and trade. Archimedes was born into a family with a scholarly background. His father, Phidias, was known as an astronomer, and it was under this early influence that young Archimedes' curiosity about the natural world began to take shape. Syracuse itself had a rich history and character that would shape Archimedes' early outlook. Founded by Greek colonists centuries before, the city had grown into a vibrant metropolis of considerable size and influence. Its harbor teemed with merchant ships from across the Mediterranean, bringing goods, news, and ideas. The silhouette of Syracuse was marked by grand temples gleaming in the sun, a massive defensive wall encircling the city, and the regal palace of its ruler overlooking the port. As a cultural crossroads, Syracuse benefited from the mingling of mainland Greek art and philosophy with the practical knowledge of local Sicilians. Young Archimedes would have walked through bustling marketplaces, heard multiple languages spoken on the docks, and seen marvels of engineering like aqueducts and sturdy trireme warships, stimuli that nourished his inquisitive mind. The environment around him was a living classroom that complemented the formal education he received from his family and tutors. From an early age, Archimedes would have been exposed to stories of the stars and planets from his father. One can imagine Phidias pointing out the constellations above the Syracuse harbor to his son, sowing the seeds of wonder. As a boy, Archimedes likely received a traditional Greek education, which in a city like Syracuse might include learning poetry, philosophy, and basic mathematics. The city's Greek heritage meant that the works of poets like Homer and philosophers like Plato were well known, and Archimedes grew up absorbing this rich cultural atmosphere. Syracuse's prosperity and intellectual activity provided fertile ground for a bright and inquisitive mind. Yet little is definitively recorded about Archimedes' childhood. We know he was a native of Syracuse and that his upbringing occurred during a period of relative peace and stability under the rule of King Hiero II, the tyrant ruler of Syracuse. Hiero II was a patron of the arts and sciences, and he fostered an environment where thinkers could thrive. It is said that Archimedes was related to King Hiero II, or at least enjoyed the patronage of the royal court, which would later be significant when his talents came to the attention of the king. In these early years, Archimedes was likely already tinkering with ideas and simple experiments, unknowingly laying the groundwork for his future genius. Chapter 2. Growing up with curiosity. As Archimedes grew into a young man, his curiosity only deepened. Surrounded by the Mediterranean's blue waters and Syracuse's busy workshops, he must have encountered practical problems that sparked theoretical questions. How do ships float and move? How can tools lift heavy objects? Such everyday sights were the seeds of scientific inquiry for Archimedes. His education would have progressed beyond basic literacy. He likely studied under tutors who taught him geometry, astronomy, and perhaps the rudiments of engineering, subjects esteemed in Greek culture. Archimedes showed a remarkable aptitude for mathematics from early on. While other youths might be content to learn geometry's basics, Archimedes pushed further. One can imagine him drawing shapes in the sand of the Sicilian beaches, calculating areas and playing with numbers as a form of recreation. There are no direct records of his early mathematical feats, but later accounts of his brilliance suggest that by the time he was a young adult, Archimedes was already recognized for his sharp intellect. While he was still in Syracuse, young Archimedes likely honed his skills not only by studying, but also by tinkering. Perhaps he spent time in the workshops near the docks, observing artisans and learning how things worked. It's easy to imagine him fashioning simple tools or gadgets for his own amusement, a miniature pulley system to lift a small weight, or using sticks and measured steps to estimate distances and heights. Such playful experiments would have reinforced his classroom learning and given him confidence that mathematics was not just abstract theory, but a key to solving real-world problems. According to tradition, Archimedes didn't confine his learning to Syracuse alone. At that time, one of the greatest centers of knowledge in the world was the city of Alexandria in Egypt. It was common for learned Greeks to travel, and Alexandria, with its famous library and museum, attracted scholars from all over. It is believed that Archimedes traveled to Alexandria in his youth to further his education. This journey, though not documented with certainty, is very plausible. Alexandria was home to the successors of Alexander the Great and boasted an intellectual community including mathematicians, astronomers, and engineers who were pushing the boundaries of knowledge. Chapter 3: Alexandria and the wider world. The experience in Alexandria proved to be formative for Archimedes. The Library of Alexandria was legendary, a repository of scrolls containing the knowledge of civilizations, from mathematics and medicine to literature. Within those halls, Archimedes had access to writings that few others in Syracuse could dream of. Scholars in Alexandria prided themselves on their research and often engaged in lively debates. In this environment, Archimedes' innate talents were nurtured and challenged. One can imagine Archimedes walking under the colonnades of the library, engrossed in a scroll about geometry, or observing astronomers as they charted the movement of stars. He might have studied with teachers who themselves had been students of Euclid or other great minds. Through these mentors, Archimedes learned not just known results, but the habit of systematic thinking and proof that was the hallmark of Greek mathematics. It wasn't all theory either. Alexandria's intellectuals were known for practical inventions and observations. The city's learned community included engineers like Ctesibius, who experimented with pneumatics and hydraulics, and it's possible Archimedes exchanged ideas with such inventors. These interactions would later feed into Archimedes' own knack for invention. We also know Archimedes corresponded with Eratosthenes of Cyrene, the chief librarian of Alexandria, and a polymath who measured Earth's circumference. This correspondence indicates that even after Archimedes left Alexandria, he maintained ties with its scholars, sharing discoveries and challenges across the sea. After spending a period of time in Egypt, Archimedes eventually returned to his beloved Syracuse. He carried with him not only the knowledge he had gained, but also a reputation as a learned man. Back in his home city, Archimedes did not retreat into isolation. He continued to correspond with Alexandrian scholars. He would send them results of his latest mathematical theorems, often with hints but no proofs, engaging in a friendly intellectual rivalry. It is said that on one occasion, Archimedes sent some propositions to his peers in Alexandria, but deliberately included a couple of false results. He did this to expose any rival who might falsely claim to have solved them without providing proof. Such was Archimedes' subtle sense of humor and his passion for rigorous truth in mathematics. Chapter 4. Syracuse, a city of opportunity. Upon returning to Syracuse, Archimedes found himself in a city that valued his knowledge. Syracuse was then at the height of its power under King Hero II and his family. King Hero II had transformed Syracuse into a strong ally of Rome for many years, and under his reign, the city enjoyed prosperity and relative peace. Hiero, recognizing Archimedes' brilliance, became a patron and friend to the mathematician. Some accounts even describe Archimedes as a kinsman or close companion of the king, which suggests that Archimedes moved in influential circles. Hiero's patronage meant that Archimedes likely had personal interactions with the king. We can imagine Hiero visiting Archimedes' workshop on occasion, intrigued by what his kinsman might be devising. Perhaps the king would find Archimedes surrounded by drawings of geometrical figures and prototypes of devices. Hiero might ask in curiosity, "What problem engages you today, my friend?" Archimedes, without vanity, would then demonstrate a small invention or outline a theorem, like how a spiral could be used to pump water or how the area of a circle could be calculated. The king, even if he did not grasp all the mathematics, would leave those meetings impressed and reassured that Syracuse harbored one of the greatest minds of the age under his protection. Back in his hometown, Archimedes devoted himself to both intellectual pursuits and practical problem-solving. He set up a workshop or study where he could conduct experiments and work on mathematical proofs. It was not uncommon in the Hellenistic age for scholars to wear multiple hats: philosopher, scientist, engineer, and Archimedes exemplified this versatile intellect. If Syracuse had any kind of academic center or group of learned men, Archimedes would have been at its core, possibly mentoring younger minds or advising on technical matters in the city. King Hero II, being an astute ruler, sought Archimedes' advice on various matters. Syracuse's position as a major port meant that engineering and shipbuilding were of great importance. There is a famous story of a massive ship named the Syracusia, which Hiero II had commissioned. This ship was said to be one of the largest built in antiquity, so large that launching it into the sea proved to be a challenge. According to some accounts, Archimedes devised a system of levers, pulleys, or perhaps a giant windlass to successfully launch the Syracusia from land into water. Whether by a complex pulley system or by a winding crank, Archimedes was able to move this immense vessel smoothly with minimal manpower. The ease with which Archimedes performed this feat reportedly astonished the onlookers, and it was during such an event that he is believed to have confidently remarked something akin to, "Give me a place to stand, and I will move the earth." It was a bold statement of the power of mechanical leverage, and it wasn't empty bragging. Archimedes had demonstrated the principle in action. The Syracusia was reportedly so large and luxurious that it boasted gardens, a gymnasium, and even a small temple on board, a true floating palace. Archimedes' feat in launching it was astounding, and some accounts say he also devised a screw-like pump in the ship's hold to remove any water leaking in, an innovation that would later bear his name. Through such experiences, Archimedes' fame as an inventor spread throughout Syracuse and beyond. His workshop became synonymous with innovation. People might have whispered about the mathematician's uncanny ability to solve problems that left others stumped. Yet, despite his growing fame for practical inventions, Archimedes himself remained more interested in the theoretical underpinnings of those inventions. Each engineering solution was, for him, an illustration of a mathematical principle or physical law. His workshop was a place where theory met practice. One can almost picture Archimedes in his personal workspace during these years. The space might have been modest, a sunlit room or courtyard filled with tools and scrolls. Perhaps there were shelves lined with rolled-up papyri containing his notes and diagrams. On a workbench could sit models of geometric shapes carved from wood, balances and levers for experiments, and basins of water for testing ideas of buoyancy. In this sanctuary of study, Archimedes could spend hours in solitude, proving theorems or tinkering with devices, utterly absorbed in the pursuit of knowledge. Chapter 5. The Golden Crown. Mystery. One of the most legendary episodes in Archimedes' life began with a problem presented by King Hero II himself. The king had commissioned a beautiful golden crown, shaped as a wreath, to be made as an offering to the gods, using a precise quantity of gold from the royal treasury. When the goldsmith delivered the finished crown, a masterpiece of intricate workmanship, something made Hiero suspicious. The crown had the correct weight, but the king harbored a concern that the smith might have cheated him by substituting some of the gold with a cheaper metal, perhaps silver, and keeping some gold for himself. It was impossible to tell by mere sight. The crown was a fixed shape and could not be melted down without destroying the artisan's work. Hero II turned to Archimedes to solve the dilemma: how to determine if the crown was pure gold without harming it. This puzzle intrigued Archimedes. Gold and silver have different densities. Gold is much heavier than silver for the same volume. But in those days, there were no precise scientific instruments to measure density directly. Archimedes knew that if he could find the volume of the irregularly shaped crown, he could compare its density to that of pure gold. But measuring the volume of such a complex object was the tricky part. For days, Archimedes pondered the problem. It filled his mind even as he attended to other tasks. The story goes that one day, burdened by the question of the crown, Archimedes decided to take a break and visit the public baths, a routine activity in Greek daily life. Even at the bathhouse, his mind was likely still turning over the puzzle. As Archimedes stepped into the bathing pool, submerging himself, he noticed the water level rise and spill over the edge slightly. In that ordinary moment lay an extraordinary insight. The amount of water that moved was directly related to the volume of the body that went in. Archimedes sat still in the bath, and a realization struck him with force. If he could submerge the crown in water, he could measure how much water it displaced, which would give its volume. Then he could do the same with a lump of pure gold of equal weight to the crown. If the crown displaced more water than the lump of gold, that meant it had a larger volume, implying it was less dense than gold, and thus likely mixed with something lighter like silver. This elegant solution flashed in Archimedes' mind all at once, and he was overcome with excitement. Chapter 6. Eureka! A moment of triumph. Archimedes was so thrilled by his discovery in the bath that, as legend tells us, he jumped out of the tub and ran through the streets of Syracuse naked, shouting, "Eureka! Eureka!" which in Greek means, "I have found it! I have found it!" In that ecstatic moment, Archimedes forgot everything else: his state of undress, the people's stares, as he rushed to inform the king of his solution. The sudden appearance of the renowned scholar barreling through town without clothes must have been a shock to onlookers, but it perfectly captures how completely absorbed Archimedes could become in his work. When inspiration struck, nothing else mattered. After composing himself and presumably getting dressed, Archimedes carried out his plan to test the crown. He carefully filled a vessel to the brim with water and gently lowered the golden crown into it, catching and measuring the overflow. Next, he did the same with a solid piece of pure gold of the exact same weight as the crown. The experiment confirmed his suspicion. The crown displaced more water than the lump of gold, indicating it had a larger volume and therefore was made of a less dense material than pure gold. The implication was clear. The goldsmith had indeed adulterated the crown with silver or another cheaper metal. Archimedes had proven this cleverly, without damaging the crown at all. The triumph of this moment was twofold. First, Archimedes provided King Hero II with the proof he needed to confront the dishonest goldsmith. The craftsman's deceit was laid bare, and no amount of denial could refute the simple physics of Archimedes' test. Justice would be served and the integrity of the offering restored. But second, and more enduring from Archimedes' perspective, this experiment demonstrated a principle of nature that would forever bear his name, Archimedes' principle of buoyancy. Simply put, it states that a body submerged in a fluid experiences an upward buoyant force equal to the weight of the fluid it displaces. In solving the crown's mystery, Archimedes laid the foundation for the science of hydrostatics. King Hiero II was astonished and delighted by Archimedes' clever solution. For the hapless goldsmith, this revelation meant exposure and humiliation. His fraud could not withstand Archimedes' test, and one imagines he met with stern punishment from the king. Archimedes, meanwhile, saw his reputation soar even higher. He had shown that abstract principles of nature could have very concrete, useful applications. The story of Archimedes' streak through Syracuse and his shout of "Eureka" became an enduring tale of scientific discovery. It illustrates not only the brilliance of Archimedes' mind, but also his human side, the pure joy and excitement of uncovering nature's secret. Over time, the bathhouse story has been told and retold, sometimes with embellishments, but at its core, it represents a genuine insight and a testament to Archimedes' ingenuity. It remains one of the most famous anecdotes in the history of science. Chapter 7. A Mind Immersed in Geometry. With his growing renown in Syracuse, Archimedes could easily have basked in the practical successes of his inventions. However, the core of Archimedes' character lay in the abstract beauty of mathematics. He was a theoretician at heart. Those close to him observed how deeply he could become absorbed in a problem. Archimedes would often be seen contemplating geometric figures for hours, oblivious to the world around him. There is an anecdote that his servants had to practically drag him away from his work to eat or bathe, because he would forget basic needs when lost in thought. Even at the public baths, it was said, he couldn't resist using an idle moment to trace geometric shapes in the smears of oil or the ashes on the warm bathhouse tiles, continuing calculations in his head. On one occasion, it is said Archimedes' attendants had to carry him, against his will, to the baths for a much-needed wash. Even then, while they anointed him with olive oil and scrubbed, Archimedes could not resist continuing to solve problems. Using his finger to draw geometric figures on his own glistening skin. He was so far lost in thought that he scarcely noticed his surroundings, taken from himself into a trance by the delight he found in geometry. This single-minded devotion sometimes made Archimedes appear eccentric, but it was a testament to his passion for knowledge. In an era without modern conveniences, Archimedes likely worked by the light of oil lamps late into the night, sketching diagrams on papyrus or sand. One can picture him in a quiet courtyard under the Syracusan stars, drawing circles and triangles with a stick on the ground. When a problem gripped him, he pursued it relentlessly. This trait would yield some of the most profound mathematical discoveries of the ancient world. Interestingly, Archimedes was not one to flaunt his work for praise. He was known to be modest about his theoretical achievements, sharing them mainly with a small circle of fellow scholars. In letters to friends like Conon or Eratosthenes, he would outline his new theorems. But Archimedes also grew wary of intellectual theft. Having heard that some in Alexandria might have been taking credit for results he shared, Archimedes cleverly turned the tables by sending out false propositions as a test. When others claimed those impossible results as their own, they were exposed, and Archimedes' point about the importance of rigorous proof was made. This episode showed a sly, humorous side of Archimedes, defending the sanctity of intellectual work while still focusing on what he loved best, geometry itself. Chapter 8. The Wonders of Geometry and Calculation. Archimedes' contributions to mathematics were staggering for his time. Working without algebraic notation or calculus, he nevertheless managed to solve problems that would not be fully understood until many centuries later. One of his great achievements was determining the areas and volumes of curved shapes, challenges that perplexed mathematicians before him. For instance, he tackled the problem of finding the area inside a circle. Rather than relying on rough measurement, Archimedes approached it with logic and precision. He reasoned that by drawing a polygon inside the circle and another around the outside of the circle, and by increasing the number of sides of these polygons, they would approximate the circle ever more closely. Archimedes pushed this idea to the extreme, effectively using polygons with so many tiny sides that they nearly matched the circle's curvature. In doing so, he was able to approximate the value of pi, the ratio of a circle's circumference to its diameter, with remarkable accuracy. He found that pi was a little more than 3.14, getting as close as was possible with the tools of his day. Another famous result of Archimedes was his work with spheres and cylinders. He discovered the exact relationship between the volume and surface area of a sphere and those of a cylinder that just encloses the sphere. Specifically, for a sphere that fits perfectly inside a cylinder, touching it all around, the volume of the sphere is exactly 2/3 the volume of that cylinder, and similarly, the sphere's surface area, including the area of its curved surface, is 2/3 that of the cylinder's total surface area, including its top and bottom. Archimedes was so proud of this elegant result that, according to later accounts, he requested a representation of a sphere and a cylinder be inscribed on his tombstone. This wish indicates how much he valued pure geometric insight. Indeed, this theorem was detailed in his treatise on the sphere and cylinder, and he considered it among his finest accomplishments. Archimedes didn't stop at the geometry of standard shapes. He ventured into more exotic territory as well. He studied the properties of parabolic curves and other sections of cones, finding the areas bounded by them via a process that was essentially an early form of integral calculus. For example, when he calculated the area of a segment of a parabola, he did it by inscribing an infinite series of ever smaller triangles within it. He proved that the area of a parabolic segment is exactly 43 4/3 the area of a certain inscribed triangle. Such a proof required summing an infinite geometric series, an astounding accomplishment for 3rd century BCE mathematics. His method for doing these kinds of calculations is now known as the method of exhaustion, a precursor to the integral calculus developed millennia later. With this method, Archimedes would essentially exhaust the area or volume in question by filling it with shapes of known area volume, honing in on the answer with each iteration. Through sheer intellect and logical rigor, he achieved results that modern students derive using calculus and limits. Archimedes had, in effect, glimpsed the future of mathematics. It is telling that many of his results, such as his value of pi and his formulas for volumes, remained the most accurate or insightful for nearly 2,000 years after his time. Mathematicians of the Renaissance and beyond often stood in awe of how far ahead Archimedes had reached, realizing that he had pushed Greek mathematics to its pinnacle. Chapter 9. Measuring the immeasurable. Beyond geometry, Archimedes had a fascination with numbers and the very concept of calculation. At a time when most people were concerned with counting everyday quantities, Archimedes dared to grapple with the astronomical, almost with infinity. This is best exemplified in his work known as the Sand Reckoner. In this treatise, Archimedes set out to answer a question that seemed almost absurd. How many grains of sand would it take to fill the entire universe? To even approach such a question, Archimedes realized he had to expand the Greek number system. The Greeks of his day used a naming system for numbers that, much like the later Roman numerals, was not well suited for expressing extremely large quantities. Archimedes invented a way to talk about unimaginably large numbers by devising a hierarchical system of orders of magnitude, effectively a place value notation taken to a grand scale. In the Sand Reckoner, he introduced a method to express numbers on the order of 10 to the power of 64, a 1 followed by 64 zeros, and beyond, quantities far beyond what was needed for any practical counting in daily life. By doing so, he effectively anticipated the idea of exponential notation and orders of magnitude in mathematics. Archimedes then estimated the size of the known universe as his sandbox. Keep in mind, this was the 3rd century BCE. The understanding of the cosmos was limited and largely geocentric. Many thinkers of his time believed the Earth was the center of a relatively small universe. However, Archimedes references the work of the astronomer Aristarchus of Samos, who had controversially proposed a sun-centered, heliocentric model of the universe. While Archimedes didn't explicitly endorse Aristarchus's model, he used it as a thought experiment because a sun-centered universe required a much larger cosmos to accommodate the orbital paths. By invoking this, Archimedes showed himself open to progressive ideas in astronomy. It's remarkable that Archimedes even considered the heliocentric model at a time when almost everyone believed in an Earth-centered cosmos. The idea of the sun at the center of planetary orbits would not gain widespread traction until nearly 1,800 years later with Copernicus. Archimedes' inclusion of Aristarchus's concept demonstrates that he was aware of cutting-edge astronomical theories and willing to use them in service of his argument. After laying out his method for naming large numbers and defining cosmic dimensions using estimates from contemporary astronomy, Archimedes concluded that the number of grains of sand required to fill the universe was on the order of 10 to the power of 63 in modern terms, a 1 followed by 63 zeros. It was an astonishing exercise in abstract thinking. The exact figure is less important than the mindset Archimedes demonstrated. For him, no question was too vast or too theoretical. He stretched the imagination of his contemporaries, showing that mathematics could reach beyond the Earth and attempt to comprehend the cosmos itself. The sand reckoner also had another subtle but significant aspect. Archimedes used it to record and discuss some advanced ideas of his time. He mentions Aristarchus's heliocentric theory and gives sizes and distances for the sun and moon according to earlier astronomers. In doing so, he preserved insights that might have otherwise been lost. Through the sand reckoner, we see Archimedes as both a mathematician and a science communicator, explaining big concepts in a way that educated readers of his era could grasp. He bridged the pragmatic world, counting grains of sand, and the philosophical wonder of the infinite, blending both in a calm, reasoned discourse. Chapter 10. Foundations of Physics and Engineering. Archimedes' genius was not confined to pure abstraction. He also laid down principles of physics that underlie engineering to this day. His approach to physics was deeply geometrical and intuitive. Take, for example, his understanding of the lever. Archimedes famously stated, "Give me a place to stand, and I will move the earth." This bold claim was born from his discovery of the laws of leverage. Archimedes realized that with a long enough lever arm and a fulcrum at the right point, even a small force could lift a very large weight. It was a principle people had witnessed in seesaws and lifting bars, but Archimedes was the first to rigorously explain how it worked in terms of proportional distances and weights. In his treatise on the equilibrium of planes, Archimedes laid out the first known scientific treatment of balance and the center of gravity. He demonstrated that a lever is balanced when the distances and weights on either side of the fulcrum are inversely proportional, in essence, establishing the law of the lever. He also found methods to calculate the centers of gravity for various shapes, a key concept in statics. These theoretical ideas translated directly into practical engineering. Armed with them, one could design better balancing scales, lifting machines, and siege engines. Archimedes melded theory and practice seamlessly, using geometry to derive results that a craftsman could apply. Another arena where Archimedes ventured was hydrostatics, the study of fluids at rest. The Eureka episode with the golden crown wasn't just a one-time trick. It exemplified a broader principle Archimedes formulated. On floating bodies, Archimedes explored why and how objects float. He articulated the law that now bears his name. A solid object immersed in a fluid will displace a volume of fluid equal to its own volume, and the object experiences an upward buoyant force equal to the weight of the displaced fluid. This is Archimedes' principle of buoyancy. This law of buoyancy is still taught to every physics student more than 2 millennia later. With this understanding, one could determine the purity of metals, as Archimedes did for the crown, or design ships and predict how much cargo they could carry without sinking. Archimedes essentially founded the science of buoyancy, which became crucial for naval engineering in a city like Syracuse that relied on sea trade and warfare. Archimedes' approach to such problems was always marked by a blend of experimentation and deductive reasoning. While he didn't have modern instruments, he used the simple tools at hand: water tubs, balances, strings, and weights, combined with sharp logic. He was known to build small models or devices to test his ideas. For example, to study levers and pulleys, he may have constructed little cranes or scale models to observe how force could be amplified. Each time Archimedes uncovered a principle of nature, it not only advanced theoretical knowledge, but immediately suggested a myriad of uses. His mind appeared to roam freely, from the why of things to the how of things, a trait that made him an exceptional figure in both science and engineering. Chapter 11. The power of the lever demonstrated Archimedes' understanding of mechanics wasn't confined to scribbles in a manuscript. He often demonstrated his principles in dramatic, tangible ways. King Hero II, ever supportive and curious, once challenged Archimedes to prove his boast that even the heaviest objects could be moved with the right mechanism. The king pointed to one of his largest ships, sitting in the Syracusan harbor, fully loaded with cargo and passengers. This vessel, heavy and firmly sitting on dry land in the docks, normally required the strength of many men to budge. Hiero asked Archimedes if his knowledge could make it possible for a single person to move the ship. Archimedes accepted the challenge. He devised a system of compound pulleys and levers to amplify force. On the chosen day, with Hero and a crowd of skeptical onlookers gathered, Archimedes set up his apparatus of ropes and pulleys attached to the ship's hull and to a fixed point on the dock. He sat at some distance, calmly holding the end of the rope. With one hand, Archimedes pulled the rope steadily, hand over hand. To everyone's astonishment, the massive ship began to stir. With a gentle creaking of wood and rope, the vessel slid forward, drawn by the mechanism that multiplied Archimedes' modest effort into a mighty force. Gradually, and with almost effortless grace, the ship moved out of the dry dock and glided into the water as smoothly as if it had been in the sea all along. The crowd erupted in amazement. King Hero II, as the story goes, was utterly struck by what he witnessed. It is said he could not decide whether this was sorcery or science. Archimedes had proven in one stroke the practical application of his theoretical claim. From that day on, Hiero reportedly exclaimed that whatever Archimedes said should be believed. Given what they had all seen, the truth of his principles was beyond doubt. This demonstration was more than a stunt. It showcased the principle of mechanical advantage in a way that everyone could understand. The compound pulley, which Archimedes either invented or improved upon, became a staple in engineering thereafter. Hoisting water from wells, loading heavy cargo onto ships, and lifting blocks for construction all became easier with the use of pulley systems. Archimedes' demonstration at the docks of Syracuse traveled far and wide in people's recollections. It was as if Archimedes had performed a magic trick, except the magic was simply excellent physics. For the rest of his life, Archimedes carried the aura of someone who could do wonders, a man who had practically tamed the laws of nature to serve human needs. Chapter 12. The invention of the Archimedean screw. Among Archimedes' many practical inventions, one stands out for its elegant simplicity and enduring utility: the Archimedean screw. This device was designed to lift water from a lower levels to a higher one, meeting common needs in agriculture and engineering. such as irrigation or draining water out of leaky ships. The origins of the Archimedean screw are a bit murky. Some ancient sources suggest that Archimedes developed it during his time in Egypt to help with irrigation along the Nile, or perhaps later to remove bilge water from the great ship Syracuse. Regardless of its exact origin, the screw pump embodies Archimedes' knack for turning theoretical insight into a practical solution. Imagine a hollow tube in the shape of a large screw, encasing a spiral blade from end to end. By placing the lower end in water and rotating the screw, by hand or with a crank turned by humans or animals, water gets scooped up in the pockets of the spiral and is carried upward as the screw turns. Eventually, water pours out from the top of the tube, effectively transferring it to a higher location. This simple mechanism can continuously move water uphill against gravity using steady rotational motion. For the people of Archimedes' time, this was revolutionary. In a place like Egypt, such a device could irrigate fields by drawing water from the Nile without the back-breaking labor of carrying buckets. In Syracuse, a coastal city, it could help empty rainwater or seawater from the hulls of ships or drain low-lying areas of farmland. The brilliance of the screw pump lies in its few moving parts and its ease of use. It could be constructed from common materials of the era: wood for the core and spiral, sealed with pitch or resin to make it watertight. Its operation was straightforward, and it didn't easily clog or break, meaning it could be trusted by those who used it, even if they didn't fully understand the underlying science. Archimedes' screw is a testament to his understanding of mechanics and his ability to intuit how continuous motion, turning a crank, could be converted into linear motion, lifting water. What's truly remarkable is that versions of this device are still in use over 2 millennia later. In modern times, Archimedean screws are employed in some sewage treatment plants to lift water, in agricultural irrigation systems around the world, and even run in reverse as turbines in certain hydroelectric schemes. Even in the ancient world, the usefulness of the screw pump was quickly recognized. Other civilizations, including the Romans, soon adopted the design to drain mines and irrigate fields. The longevity of this invention speaks volumes about Archimedes' practical genius. In his lifetime, the screw pump improved daily life. In the centuries that followed, it became part of humanity's basic toolkit for manipulating water, all tracing back to the quiet intellect of the man in Syracuse. Chapter 13. Arming Syracuse, Engines of War. Despite Archimedes' personal preference for pure mathematics, the turbulent times he lived in eventually drew him into the realm of warfare. Syracuse, while prosperous, was not isolated from the great power struggles of the Mediterranean. The city's strategic location made it a coveted prize for empires like Rome and Carthage. As tensions grew in the late 3rd century BCE, Syracuse had to fortify its defenses. King Hero II, and later his grandson Hieronymus, called upon Archimedes to apply his inventive mind to protect the city. Archimedes had apparently designed a range of war machines well before the Romans arrived at Syracuse's gates. Many of these were siege defense weapons that took advantage of his knowledge of mechanics and projectiles. He had developed these devices at King Hero's urging, more as demonstrations of geometric principles made practical than as true engines of war. Archimedes himself considered such inventions a sideline to his pure mathematical pursuits. Among the simpler devices were improved catapults and ballistae, giant crossbows. Archimedes enhanced these by adjusting their size, tension, and angle to strike at various distances. Some were tuned for long-range hurling of stones or javelins, while others were designed for shorter range but with devastating impact. By deploying a variety of these engines, Syracuse's defenders could harry the enemy, whether they were far out at sea or drawing up close to the city walls. But it was not just straightforward catapults. Archimedes engineered more novel contraptions as well. One infamous invention was a sort of crane outfitted with a large grappling hook or claw. This later came to be known as the claw of Archimedes. It was essentially an enormous lever arm with a metal grapnel, ingeniously balanced and operated by hidden pulleys and counterweights inside the walls. It worked by reaching over the city battlements, snagging onto the hull of an enemy ship, and then using a winch mechanism to abruptly lift the ship's front end out of the water. Once the ship was destabilized in this way, perhaps even lifted partly into the air, the operators would suddenly release it. The vessel would then slam back into the water with such force that it could capsize, or at least jolt and terrify the crew. The sight of a ship being plucked upward by an unseen hand from the city walls must have been truly frightening. To the Roman sailors attacking Syracuse, it was as though the city's fortifications themselves could reach out and swat their ships. Archimedes also reportedly designed cranes that could drop heavy weights, like great stones or lumps of lead, onto enemy ships or siege towers that came too close. One can imagine an arm stretching out from the battlements, releasing a crushing payload onto anything below. Additionally, there were accounts of giant crossbow-like devices that could launch multiple smaller arrows or darts in a volley, increasing the chances of hitting targets. All these war machines had a single aim: to keep the enemy as far from Syracuse as possible and to make any approach exceedingly costly. Archimedes approached these devices with the same meticulous thought he gave to his scientific problems. He calculated trajectories, ranges, and the tensile strength of ropes. He considered how to maximize the impact of gravity in dropping weights, or tension in launching projectiles. In essence, he turned the city of Syracuse into one large, well-calibrated defensive system. The people of Syracuse must have watched these preparations with a mix of hope and awe, placing their trust in Archimedes' almost mythical ingenuity to save them from what was coming. Chapter 14. The Claw and the Burning Mirrors. Two of Archimedes' defensive inventions became the stuff of legend: the claw of Archimedes, already described, and a purported solar weapon, often referred to as Archimedes' burning mirrors. The latter is one of the most debated devices attributed to Archimedes. According to later accounts and popular imagination, Archimedes devised a way to harness the power of the sun to set enemy ships ablaze. The idea was that by using large polished shields or specially made bronze mirrors to reflect and concentrate sunlight, the focused beam could ignite sails or wooden hulls at a distance. Picture the scene. As Roman ships encroached upon the walls of Syracuse, a group of soldiers or engineers under Archimedes' direction angled a series of shiny metal mirrors toward an approaching vessel. At the right moment, the Mediterranean sun's rays would bounce off these surfaces and converge onto the side of a ship as a blinding, searing spot of light. If concentrated long enough on a flammable part of the ship, say the tar-coated hull or a sail, legend has it that the wood or cloth would catch fire. To the Romans experiencing it, it would seem as if Apollo god of the sun, had joined the battle on Syracuse's side. However, it is important to note that the burning mirrors scenario is not mentioned in the earliest and most reliable historical accounts of the siege. Historians like Polybius and Livy, who describe the siege closer to the time it happened, make no reference to mirrors or solar weapons. The story appears in the historical record centuries after Archimedes' death, which makes many scholars suspect that it is more myth than reality. Some have theorized that later writers might have misinterpreted or exaggerated accounts of other weapons. For example, the Roman historian Lucian, 2nd century AD, does mention that Archimedes set attacking ships on fire, but he does not say how, perhaps suggesting the use of fire arrows or incendiary projectiles rather than giant mirrors. The specific detail of mirrors doesn't appear until even later in writings by Galen and Anthemius of Tralles, long after the fact. Regardless of its authenticity, the legend persisted and became part of Archimedes' lore. Renaissance scholars were so intrigued that they tried to recreate the mirror weapon. In modern times, experiments have been conducted, even by TV programs and the Mythbusters, to test whether Archimedes' mirrors could have worked. Some tests suggest it's theoretically possible under ideal conditions: a clear sunny day, a stationary target, dozens of large, well-polished mirrors, and careful coordination, while others have deemed it impractical for actual warfare, given the difficulty of maintaining focus on a moving ship from a rocking city wall. Whether true or not, the burning mirrors make for a dramatic story, illustrating how Archimedes' name became linked with almost supernatural feats of engineering. The claw of Archimedes, on the other hand, is better attested in ancient sources and was vividly described by later writers. Surviving Roman soldiers and sailors, once the siege was over, told tales of these cranes and grappling hooks lifting ships out of the sea. The psychological effect of such devices was enormous. The Roman forces, usually confident in their role as attackers with superior siege engines, suddenly found themselves on the receiving end of an ingenious defense that neutralized many of their advantages. Anecdotes spread rapidly, even during the war. Plutarch writes that the Romans grew to fear even the sight of a rope or a beam extending over the wall, as it might herald one of Archimedes' machines. According to one colorful account, if a Roman soldier saw a seemingly harmless piece of wood peeking over the ramparts, he would shout, "Archimedes is coming," and his comrades would scatter in panic. The city's fortifications, animated by Archimedes' inventions, had become a source of dread. Archimedes' genius had, in effect, become an invisible ally for Syracuse, one that the Romans, for all their might, did not know how to fight directly. Chapter 15. The Gathering Storm. For decades, Syracuse had enjoyed stability under King Hiero II, who carefully managed alliances to protect the city. But inevitably, history caught up with Syracuse. In 215 BCE, Hiero II died, leaving the rule to his inexperienced grandson, Hieronymus. The timing could not have been worse. This was during the Second Punic War, a colossal struggle between Rome and Carthage for dominance. Syracuse was caught in the middle. While Hiero had been a loyal ally to Rome, his successors wavered. Under new leadership, Syracuse showed signs of shifting its allegiance toward Carthage, perhaps hoping to play the two powers against each other to maintain independence. Rome, however, had little patience for such wavering once they suspected Syracuse of aiding their enemy. Hannibal, Carthage's greatest general, was at that time rampaging through Italy, threatening Rome itself after his stunning victories. The Romans, stretched by their war against Hannibal, knew they could not afford to let Syracuse become an enemy stronghold allied to Carthage. Thus, they decided to act decisively. In 214 BCE, the Roman Republic dispatched a force to bring Syracuse to heel. They could not risk a wealthy, strategically located city like Syracuse supplying or coordinating with Carthage. The Roman expedition was led by Marcus Claudius Marcellus, a capable and battle-hardened general known both for his military skill and for his respect for Greek culture. Marcellus anticipated a swift campaign. After all, Syracuse was just a single city, and Rome's legions had subdued much larger realms. Inside Syracuse, preparations for defense were frantic. Syracuse's geography favored the defenders. Part of the city sat on the island of Ortygia, off the coast, and a long wall known as the Epipolae ran along high ground on the mainland, making direct assaults difficult. Within these defenses, Archimedes and the Syracusans shored up gates, strengthened battlements, and positioned their war machines at key points overlooking the sea and land approaches. The city had formidable stone walls, battlements along the cliffs, and a harbor that could be sealed by chains across its mouth. Still, the people were anxious. They knew Rome's reputation and remembered the fate of other cities that had defied the Republic. In this dire moment, all hopes turned to Archimedes, the now elderly mathematician. By 214 BCE, Archimedes was in his 70s, became the chief architect of Syracuse's defense. Though Archimedes had never been a soldier, the city now looked to his intellect as its greatest weapon. He oversaw the reinforcement of fortifications and personally supervised the installation of his various engines of war. What had once been theoretical designs or mere demonstrations were now being readied for actual combat. The quiet scholar had become, in effect, Syracuse's military engineer, and the stage was set for a confrontation that would become legendary. Chapter 16. The Siege of Syracuse begins when Marcellus's forces reached Syracuse. They initiated a siege, fully expecting to intimidate the Syracusans into quick submission. The Roman fleet approached the harbor walls with ships equipped for assault, while legions on land advanced toward the city's main gates and walls. Marcellus attempted a coordinated attack by land and sea, even choosing to strike under cover of darkness, hoping to catch the city off guard. However, Archimedes and the Syracusans were not taken by surprise. As the first light of dawn broke, the Roman ships rowed steadily forward, siege ladders and grapnels at the ready, and on land, the siege towers began rumbling toward the walls. Suddenly, the quiet morning was shattered by the twang of catapults and the whistling of giant projectiles. Archimedes' long-range catapults, which had been calibrated to strike distant targets, began hurling massive stones at the Roman galleys before they could reach the city's defenses. Huge rocks crashed onto the decks, splintering wood and creating chaos among the oarsmen and marines. At the same time, smaller ballistae launched volleys of arrows and javelins that rained down on the advancing infantry, breaking up their formations. Marcellus's troops, who thought they would easily scale the walls, were stunned by the ferocity and precision of the defense. As they wheeled their siege towers closer, they encountered another nasty surprise. Smaller catapults, hidden behind the ramparts, suddenly sprang to life, launching a hail of sharp darts at point-blank range. The top ranks of the siege towers were cleared in moments, and Roman soldiers scrambling up ladders found themselves cut down or forced to retreat. Meanwhile, any ships that managed to get within range of the walls found themselves under attack from above in a more bizarre manner. Long wooden beams swung out from Syracuse's walls as if the city had grown mechanical arms. These were Archimedes' cranes, and at the end of one such crane, a giant iron claw dropped onto a Roman ship, hooking it securely. Before the crew understood what was happening, the claw heaved upward. The ship's bow was lifted high out of the water, its stern dipping and sending men tumbling across the deck. Then, with a sudden release, the ship was dropped. It slammed back into the sea, water rushing over its deck. Some ships so assaulted capsized entirely. Others were left swamped and disabled, their crews in terror. The Roman soldiers and sailors were thrown into panic. Marcellus, observing from a safe distance, watched in amazement and mounting concern as his well-planned assault crumbled. He reportedly exclaimed that the enemy had some kind of supernatural aid, remarking that "we are not fighting against men, but against the gods." Indeed, to the Romans, it felt as if an invisible deity, Archimedes' genius, was defending Syracuse. The first day of the siege thus ended with a decisive repulse of the Roman attack. The Romans, who had expected to overrun Syracuse quickly, now found themselves facing a kind of resistance they had never encountered before. One man's brainpower had turned the city into a near impregnable fortress, and the mighty Roman army was at a loss as to how to overcome it. Chapter 17. Roman Frustrations and a Deadlock. The failure of the initial assault forced Marcellus to change tactics. Realizing that storming Syracuse was too costly, he settled into a traditional siege strategy, encircling the city to cut off supplies and reinforcements. The Romans established fortified camps on the landward sides of Syracuse and maintained a blockade by sea, hoping to starve the city into surrender over time. Yet even in the slower grind of a siege, Archimedes continued to be a thorn in their side. Whenever the Romans tried to probe the defenses, sending small contingents at night to test for weak points or constructing new siege equipment further back, Archimedes had an answer waiting. Marcellus tried approaching the walls under cover, constructing huge movable shelters, the so-called tortoise formations, to protect his men from missiles as they advanced. But Archimedes had designed his catapults to strike at various angles, including high trajectories. Large stones were lobbed in lofty arcs over the walls to crash down directly on the shelters, smashing them and the soldiers beneath. If Roman sappers attempted to approach under cover of darkness, they were met with sudden barrages of projectiles guided by Syracusan lookouts who had carefully ranged the approaches beforehand. As days turned to weeks, the morale of the Roman troops waned. They developed an almost superstitious fear of the city's walls. Plutarch later wrote that the Romans grew so afraid of Archimedes' devices that if even a rope or a small piece of wood appeared over the wall, a cry would go up, "Archimedes is aiming at us," and soldiers would scatter or cower, expecting some deadly contraption to follow. Marcellus himself supposedly quipped that his men were not fighting against the Syracusans so much as fighting against Archimedes' intelligence. The once bold attackers adopted a cautious, almost timid approach. They kept their distance during the day, staying just outside the range of those fearsome engines, and only attempted any movements at night when they hoped Archimedes' aim would be less exact. On many nights, Roman sentries peered anxiously toward the dark silhouette of the city. The usual quiet would set them on edge. Archimedes' silence felt as dangerous as his action. A clink of metal or a torch flickering on the walls could startle battle-hardened legionaries. It is said that jittery Roman guards would jump at shadows, nerves frayed by the knowledge that at any moment, with no warning, something could come hurtling out of the sky at them. In effect, Archimedes had succeeded in making the Roman army feel besieged by an unseen force. Inside the city, Archimedes' presence gave the Syracusans hope. They took heart in each failed Roman attack and began to believe that as long as Archimedes was devising defenses, Syracuse might indeed hold out indefinitely. However, the siege dragged on. Syracuse, despite its strong walls, was not entirely self-sufficient. The Romans controlled the land around the city and patrolled the waters beyond the harbor, which made bringing in supplies increasingly difficult. The stalemate continued for months. Both besiegers and besieged suffered. The Romans contended with heat and disease in their camps, while inside Syracuse food grew scarce and anxiety spread as the people endured hunger and uncertainty. It was becoming a battle of endurance. Archimedes' wits versus Roman perseverance, ingenuity versus time. Chapter 18. The Long Siege and a Turning Tide. For 2 long years, the struggle for Syracuse continued. This was not continuous fighting, but a tense, drawn-out standoff. Syracuse endured hunger and hardship as the Roman blockade tightened its grip. Carthage attempted to send reinforcements by sea during this time, leading to battles elsewhere in Sicily, but the Romans largely thwarted any relief efforts. The people of Syracuse grew weary. Many of Hero's old soldiers had fallen, and those remaining were exhausted from constant vigilance. The Romans, frustrated by their inability to breach the city, resorted to patience and cunning. They knew that as the months wore on, the Syracusans would grow desperate. Finally, a turning point arrived during a festival night in 212 BCE. Syracuse was celebrating the annual festival of Artemis, a night of feasting and merriment, during which the city's usual vigilance was relaxed. There were processions, music, and perhaps a sense of temporary relief from the siege's pressures. Many citizens were preoccupied with the festivities. Even some of the guards might have indulged in wine or wandered off to join the revelry. Sensing an opportunity, Marcellus decided to strike. Under the cover of darkness and the distraction of celebration, Marcellus dispatched a hand-picked band of soldiers to approach a section of the wall. Different ancient sources vary on the details. Some suggest treachery was involved, with a Syracusan insider or a disgruntled guard showing the Romans a less defended postern gate or a scalable section of the wall. Others simply note that the Romans chose a point that was difficult for the defenders to monitor. In any case, a small group of Roman troops managed to scale the walls or slip through a gate. They swiftly moved to secure one of the city's key entrances, allowing more of their comrades to pour inside. Once the Romans gained a foothold within the city walls, the stalemate was broken. In the dead of night, fighting erupted in the streets of Syracuse. We can imagine the confusion and terror, torchlight dancing on stone walls, the clash of swords in narrow alleys, and sleeping citizens jolted awake by shouts and screams. The proud city that had held out for so long was now being taken from within, not by brute force at the walls, but by stealth and possibly betrayal. Roman soldiers rushed to seize strategic points, the main gate, the high ground of the Epipoli Hill, and the island of Ortygia where the palace was, while the Syracusans, leaderless and shocked, tried to mount a defense in the dark. Marcellus's strategy had finally succeeded. By dawn, Syracuse's flag, or what served as the city's emblem, was being pulled down, and the Roman standard rose in its place. The city of Syracuse, after years of heroic defense, had fallen. What followed was the grim aftermath that often accompanied a captured city in ancient times: looting, destruction, and the slaughter of those who resisted. Marcellus had given orders to spare certain people, especially Archimedes, whose fame had reached even the Roman ranks. But in the chaos of a sack, such orders were not always heeded. Chapter 19. The fateful end. Do not disturb my circles. Amid the mayhem of Syracuse's fall, Archimedes met his tragic end. Different historical sources give slightly different versions of the story, but they agree on the core event. Archimedes was killed by a Roman soldier during the sack of the city. The often told account has Archimedes in his study, or perhaps in a courtyard, deeply engrossed in a mathematical problem, even as enemy soldiers were overrunning the city around him. He was drawing geometric figures, circles according to tradition, in the dust or sand at his feet. While others were fleeing or fighting, Archimedes' mind was characteristically elsewhere, lost in the abstractions he loved. A Roman soldier came upon the old man and, not knowing who he was, demanded that Archimedes accompany him, likely to be presented to Marcellus, who wanted the famous inventor spared. Archimedes, so absorbed in his work, reportedly looked up only briefly to say, "Do not disturb my circles," indicating he needed time to finish the problem he was working on. In that moment, Archimedes was utterly oblivious to the danger around him, focused entirely on the patterns he was studying. To the soldier, who was in the frenzy of sacking a city, this response may have seemed like defiance or disrespect. Perhaps he didn't understand the Greek words, or perhaps he simply lost his temper at the delay. The soldier struck Archimedes down, killing him with a sword on the spot. Another version of the story given by Plutarch tells that Archimedes was carrying some of his mathematical instruments, like rulers and compasses, when a Roman soldier confronted him. The soldier, thinking the instruments might be valuable loot or not understanding what they were, killed Archimedes, possibly in a greedy scuffle. Regardless of the exact chain of events, the outcome was the same. Archimedes, the genius who had defended Syracuse with his mind, was dead, felled by an anonymous sword. He was about 75 years old. When the dust settled, General Marcellus was reportedly distraught to hear of Archimedes' death. Marcellus understood the magnitude of the loss, not just for Syracuse, but for the world of knowledge. He had admired Archimedes' prowess, even as it had cost him time and men during the siege, and had given explicit orders that the mathematician should be taken alive and unharmed. By some accounts, he punished the soldier who had slain Archimedes, furious that his direct command had been disobeyed. Marcellus ensured that Archimedes' body was treated with respect amid the chaos. The Roman general is said to have arranged a proper burial for Archimedes, and he also saw to it that Archimedes' relatives were not harmed and were given their freedom, recognizing that they had been connected to a very special individual. The phrase, "Do not disturb my circles," echoing from this incident, has become emblematic of Archimedes' devotion to his work, even in the face of mortal peril. It highlights the almost otherworldly focus of the man, a scientist who placed his concentration on truth above the immediate reality of violence around him. The war that had made Archimedes' reputation as a master of defense ultimately led to his demise. In the grand narrative of history, Archimedes' death marked not only the fall of Syracuse, but also symbolized the passing of an era. After him, no Greek mathematician of such caliber would emerge until many centuries later. Chapter 20. The Aftermath of Conquest. With Syracuse captured, Rome cemented its control over Sicily. Marcellus allowed his troops to loot the city, as was customary, but he also took steps to preserve certain treasures of art and learning. Syracuse had been a center of Greek culture, science, and engineering, and Marcellus, who appreciated Greek achievements, sought to save some of the city's patrimony. Many of the finest statues, paintings, and other artworks from Syracuse were carefully shipped to Rome, where they would later adorn Roman temples and public buildings. This was one of the ways Greek culture spread into the Roman Republic. Marcellus also took a personal interest in some of Archimedes' inventions and possessions. There are accounts that he discovered in Archimedes' home or workshop several curious devices, such as sphere-making mechanisms, early planetariums. One legendary item was a bronze model, often described as a kind of orrery or planetarium that Archimedes had built to simulate the motions of celestial bodies. This device could show the movements of the sun, moon, earth, and possibly the known planets when it was cranked. Marcellus was fascinated by it. He brought at least one such mechanism back to Rome as a war trophy, later donating it to a temple, where it became a marvel for educated Romans to examine. When displayed in Rome, it astonished all who saw it. It was as if Archimedes had captured the heavens in a small contraption of gears and ingenuity. This story underscores just how advanced Archimedes' understanding was. For him to build a working model of the solar system required sophisticated knowledge of astronomy and mechanical design. Marcellus' respect for Archimedes was evident. He reportedly called Archimedes a geometrical Briareus, referencing a mythical giant with 100 arms, to symbolize the many ways Archimedes could attack or solve a problem. Marcellus lamented the loss of Archimedes and was said to have remarked that the Romans had lost a great asset in Archimedes' death. Indeed, Marcellus had hoped to bring Archimedes to Rome to meet the scholars there, or at least to honor him. In the wake of the siege, Syracuse's surviving inhabitants faced a grim new reality. The city that had flourished under Hero's enlightened rule was now under the control of foreign conquerors. Many Syracusans were killed in the sack, and many others, possibly tens of thousands, were sold into slavery. The cultural and intellectual life of Syracuse, which had peaked with Archimedes, faded under Roman rule. Syracuse became a provincial city, its glory days behind it. However, Archimedes' name was not forgotten. Quite the opposite. Among educated circles in Rome and elsewhere, he quickly became a legend. The Roman statesman Cicero, who was an avid admirer of Greek philosophy and science, later served as a magistrate in Sicily, several decades before the birth of Christ. During his time there, around 75 BCE, roughly 137 years after Archimedes' death, Cicero sought out Archimedes' tomb. Initially, locals told him that such a tomb did not exist or had been lost to time, but Cicero persisted, recalling references to Archimedes' wish to have a sphere and cylinder inscribed on his gravestone. Eventually, in a neglected corner near the Agrigentine gate of Syracuse, overgrown with weeds and brambles, Cicero found a gravestone bearing the image of a sphere within a cylinder. He had laborers clear away the vegetation and dirt, revealing a faint inscription. Indeed, it was Archimedes' resting place. Cicero was moved by this discovery. Here lay the remains of a man who had challenged an empire with his intellect, whose works were still studied by scholars, yet whose tomb had been nearly forgotten by his own people. Cicero considered it a travesty that the greatest son of Syracuse was not properly honored or remembered by the Syracusans, and he took pride in having restored Archimedes' grave to memory. The image of Cicero gazing upon Archimedes' tomb, long neglected, carved with the geometrical shapes Archimedes cherished, serves as a poignant epilogue. It reminds us that worldly renown can be fleeting, but the legacy of the mind endures, waiting to be rediscovered by those who seek it. Chapter 21. A Legacy in Ancient Memory. Archimedes' influence did not die with him. In fact, it grew as his ideas spread through the ancient world. Within a generation of his death, Archimedes was being hailed by scholars as one of the greatest mathematicians and inventors who had ever lived. His contemporaries and near contemporaries collected and commented on his work. In Alexandria, scholars like Conon, who had been his friend, and later Apollonius of Perga, took inspiration from Archimedes' results and methods. In the wider Greek world, Archimedes' reputation approached that of a near mythical figure, someone who had outwitted a Roman army and who could pluck fire from the heavens or move great ships single-handedly. Archimedes left behind many written works that became classics of scientific literature. His treatises, including On the Equilibrium of Planes, covering the law of the lever and centers of gravity, On Floating Bodies, explaining why things float with the principle of buoyancy, Measurement of a Circle, presenting his calculation of pi, On the Sphere and Cylinder, detailing the relationships between those shapes, and several others were copied and studied by learned men in subsequent generations. These writings circulated in the Hellenistic Greek world and later in the Roman sphere, allowing those who could understand their depth to marvel at Archimedes' genius on the page. In antiquity, during the period of the Roman Republic and early empire, educated Romans took an interest in Greek science and mathematics, and Archimedes' works were among the most valued. For example, the Roman architect and engineer Vitruvius, 1st century BCE, refers to Archimedes in his writings on architecture and machines, acknowledging him as a master. The geographer Strabo, around the same time, notes Archimedes' special role in the defense of Syracuse. The very fact that Roman authors, practical people, not prone to flights of fancy, spoke of Archimedes with admiration is telling. Yet it was in the realm of pure thought that Archimedes left an even more indelible mark. Greek mathematicians who came after him, such as Apollonius and later Pappus of Alexandria, in the 3rd century AD, held Archimedes up as the gold standard of mathematical ingenuity. They studied his proofs, sometimes adding commentary or alternate proofs of their own to his works. He gained a reputation in antiquity akin to that of Newton or Einstein in modern times, a byword for genius. A few of Archimedes' treatises, along with those of Euclid, became staples of mathematical education in the ancient world's academies. However, with time, some of Archimedes' works were lost or became less understood. As the Western Roman Empire fell into decline, much scientific and mathematical knowledge faded in Europe. Still, in the Eastern Roman, Byzantine Empire, Greek scholars preserved Archimedes' heritage. His name lived on through Byzantine encyclopedias and commentaries. By the early Middle Ages, what remained of Archimedes' works was carefully guarded in monastic libraries. In the Islamic world, scholars translated Greek scientific texts, Archimedes included, into Arabic, often with commentary and further development. For instance, around the 9th century AD, mathematicians in Baghdad, like Thabit ibn Qurra, translated Archimedes' treatises, which helped preserve them and eventually reintroduce them to Europe. Through this chain of transmission, Archimedes' legacy was never entirely forgotten, even if direct knowledge of his work diminished at times. To the Romans of classical antiquity, Archimedes was often remembered more for his dramatic exploits than for his abstract theories. Stories of his war machines and his eureka moment became part of popular lore, but in scholarly circles, the true breadth of his work, his mathematical proofs and scientific insights, continued to command respect. Even as late as the 4th and 5th centuries AD, Archimedes was cited by writers like Marcianus Capella and Proclus as the epitome of mathematical brilliance. In short, Archimedes' legacy in the ancient and late ancient world was twofold. He was the clever inventor who could defend a city single-handedly, and he was the supreme geometer whose works were treasures of the mind. Chapter 22. Conclusion: The Eternal Genius of Archimedes. The life of Archimedes is a tapestry of wonder, ingenuity, and enduring influence. It is the story of a curious boy in a Sicilian city who grew up to challenge the limits of knowledge, of a thinker who could immerse himself so deeply in contemplation that the world outside fell away. It is the tale of a mathematician who found delight in truths of geometry, and of an inventor who used those truths to build devices that almost defy belief. We have followed Archimedes from his origins in Syracuse, through his formative time in Alexandria, back to Syracuse where he achieved brilliant things in peace and in war, and finally to the poignant end of his life amid conflict. As we reach the end of this long, calming journey through Archimedes' life, we can take comfort in the idea that knowledge and curiosity are timeless. The same stars Archimedes studied still shine above us. Even a crater on the moon now bears his name, a fitting honor set among those very stars. The principles he discovered still govern the world, whether it's a ship floating in water or a satellite orbiting Earth, obeying the same laws of geometry and physics that he articulated. We continue to benefit daily from his insights, each time water flows upward through a pump, or when we balance on a seesaw, Archimedes is there in the background. There is also a gentle reassurance in Archimedes' story about the endurance of truth. Empires rose and fell. Syracuse was conquered. Rome eventually faded. The medieval scribes erased and rewrote. But Archimedes' words and ideas found ways to survive. In the quiet margins of medieval manuscripts, in the revival of learning during the Renaissance, and in the experiments of modern science, Archimedes has been a steady companion. It's as if great ideas have a life of their own, echoing through time, waiting for receptive minds to listen. Reliving Archimedes' life in such detail provides more than just historical knowledge. It offers a meditative reflection on human potential. We saw Archimedes' determination as he persisted with a math problem despite worldly distractions. We sensed his humility and occasional humor in the way he shared or hid his discoveries. We felt the drama of his inventive defenses holding back an army. Through it all, Archimedes remained passionately true to himself. a seeker of truth and beauty in the laws of nature, whether he was mapping the heavens or devising a way to move the earth. In the calm of the night, as we let the lessons of Archimedes' life sink in, there is a peaceful sense of continuity. Over 2,000 years ago, a man strove to understand the world around him using reason and imagination. Today, we still do the same. Archimedes, in a way, invites us to join that grand pursuit. His legacy is not only in the specific principles or inventions he left us, but in the spirit of inquiry and wonder he embodied. That spirit is something we can carry with us, and so we conclude this chronicle of Archimedes. In our minds, perhaps we still picture him in his final moments, calmly drawing figures in the sand, so engrossed in the eternal truths of geometry that he paid no heed to temporal danger. It is a serene image, almost Zen-like, and it encapsulates the essence of Archimedes. May his story inspire curiosity and tranquility in us, as we imagine gentle waves on the Sicilian shore and an old mathematician calmly tracing his beloved circles in the sand. Forever, a symbol of the power and beauty of a focused mind.